Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's learn Kings and Generals. It's been a while since I watched a Kings and Generals video. My name's Connor. If you're new, original link to the video top of the description, preemptive like Muslim conquests from the Eastern Roman perspective. Perfect. Yep, we're good.
The Eastern Roman Empire, commonly known as Byzantium, and the Islamic Caliphate were the two richest and most culturally sophisticated civilizations of the Middle Ages. The two cultures first met when Islam sprang forth into the world in the 7th century CE and steamrolled through Byzantine Egypt and Syria.
So were the Crusades Eastern Roman Byzantine requests from the Pope to ask for European former Western Roman Empire? Forget that. Just were they asked by the Byzantines to the Pope to get them to come over here to fight with them, or is that wrong?
Shocking the Roman world to its core and sending it into a deep contemplation and transformation as they contemplated on how to change and adapt in the face of this new ascendant superpower. In this episode, we will investigate just what these changes were, how Byzantium viewed the Islamic conquests, how their economy and state apparatus changed, as well as their ideology and social structure. Welcome to our video on the Byzantine perspective on the Islamic conquests and how Roman society adapted to the coming of Dar al-Islam. This week, our YouTube members and patrons will continue watching our series on the Iberian Reconquista, with the video on the Battle of Sagrajas, the engagement that allowed the Almoravids to keep the balance of power on the peninsula. The support of our YouTube members and patrons allows us to continue releasing these free videos without worrying about the unstable YouTube ad revenue and lets us be much more choosy in terms of our sponsors. You can join their ranks via the links in the description to get access to 2 weekly exclusive videos, with more than 150 right now, including the series on the Pacific War, Fall of Sparta, First and Second Punic Wars, Russian Revolutions and the Civil War, Italian Reunification Wars, the Albigensian Crusade, History of Prussia, Biography of Sulla, Reunification War, First and Second Punic Wars, Russian Revolutions and the Civil War, Italian Reunification Wars, the Albigensian Crusade,
Albigensian Crusade.
History of Prussia, Biography of Sulla, Reconquista, World War II North African Campaign, the Persian Wars, and much more.
Biography of Sulla and that other one are the only ones.
Thanks for your kind support.
I don't even
know. The
know.
Byzantine Empire was already in a period of transition when the Islamic conquests began in the 640s. Palestinian provinces were already becoming more urban, and this continued under the caliphs. At the same time, Byzantium's eastern and southern provinces were depleted after having been long embroiled in the Byzantine-Sasanian War of 602 to 628 CE. These regions were both under looser control and ethno-religiously distinct.
Coptic, Armenian, Nestorian, as well as Jewish and Sumerian groups inhabited the region alongside Chalcedonian Christians. The grievances of many of these groups towards Constantinople led many to embrace the new Islamic political order, though often with reservations. Wow. They must have really not liked you in order to not care as much about a whole different religion and people coming in to take these lands. So had to have been a lot of beef.
These regions were both under looser control and ethno-religiously distinct. Thus, it should be no surprise that when the early Islamic conquests occurred, most of the region was taken over by Islamic forces, as there were local actors that were either indifferent or opposed to the Byzantines. Such relatively speedy conquests came as quite a shock to the Byzantines, both for those under new Islamic rule and those still living in imperial territory. Within the remaining Byzantine provinces,
So the Muslim army's cavalry was pretty legendary, right? And couple that with a kind of falling Byzantine power hold over the Mediterranean just seems like a recipe for disaster or for success for the Arab armies, but disaster or Muslim armies. I always get like Turk, Persian, Arab mixed up. I think I'm good. Those are 3 separate peoples. Muslim, Islamic cultures, but with subsets of Turkic, Persian, and Arabic culture. I think I'm getting there.
The use of the Christian church as a means to give divine sanction to the emperors that had begun under Emperor Heracleios continued and accelerated. Heracleios had shown himself in propaganda as a soldier of Christ who was ready to defend the faith and personally go to battle in the name of God. This is an ideology that was used by later emperors in response to future Islamic invasions. In an ironic twist, these theological developments mirror Islamic notions of just and holy war. The concept of a holy war against religious enemies would endure for most of Byzantine history. It would be used as a casus belli, or reason for war, for centuries thereafter, such as when the ruthless Nicephorus Phocas reconquered the island of Crete from the Arabs in the 10th century CE. Shortly after the early Islamic conquests, different peoples who were formerly Roman subjects and now under Arab rule reacted in...
So they would see Islamic conquerings as religious ones and therefore relentless, and use that as propaganda to, whether true or not, to raise their own armies. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Who were formerly Roman subjects and now under Arab rule reacted in different ways to their new state of affairs. For instance, a Nestorian Archbishop of Adiabini in modern-day Iraq, Ishoyab III, considered the new power that took over his homeland to have been sent as a punishment from God. However, this does not mean he was for revolting against Islamicate rule. In fact, his stance was similar to that of the Patriarch of the Assyrian Church, a pragmatist who advocated working with the new Muslim rulers to both survive and thrive. A similar existential view was promoted by Sophronius I, Chalcedonian Patriarch of Jerusalem. As the Islamic troops were besieging the city, his sermons saw the conquests as a failure of the piety of the Christian population and due to their sins. However, he tried to lessen the damage of the invasions by negotiating with Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab.
It's crazy how much people blame human invasions, like from other humans, as like I can understand sort of people blaming like some sort of plague or natural disaster on some theistic reason, but like blaming an invasion from another people on some sort of divine punishment gives a sort of like so you don't think they have any will of their own? You think that they're just NPCs at the will of God to provide a punishment like a natural disaster or a plague would be seen as one? It's interesting, and it kind of... Okay, all right.
Lessen the damage of the invasions by negotiating with Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. The view piety of the Christian population and due to their sins. However, he tried to lessen the damage of the invasions by negotiating with Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. The view that Christians in the newly conquered territories should cooperate with their new Muslim overlords was shared by a monk known as Anastasios the Sinite, who went as far as to blame the Islamic conquests on the sins of the reigning Byzantine emperor Constans II. Others, like the indigenous Coptic Christians of Egypt, saw an opportunity to live in a more lax environment, for Byzantium was rather harsh to other Christian sects, like the Syriacs, Armenians, Assyrians, and Copts.
Interesting.
However, despite their adversarial relation to the Byzantine Church, that did not mean these Eastern churches were thrilled about living under Islamic rule.
Of course.
Several Syriac Christians penned apocalyptic literature that revolved around the end of the world or the downfall of the caliphate. Such texts include the Gospel of the 12 Apostles, a text which prophesied a future in which the Sasanian Empire, conquered by the Muslims, would rise again and create a rift in the Islamic world, leaving an opportunity for a new Christian emperor to establish a Christian kingdom that liberates the newly conquered Christians in Syria and Egypt.
And that's kind of what happened, isn't it? With Shia? That he's kind of correct, right?
An author claiming to be the 4th century church father Methodius of Olympus also wrote an apocalypse which hoped for the restoration of Christian rule over the Holy Land.
There's really something that it seems obvious and kind of dumb for me to say, but I have to say it because I think it's lost on a lot of people. As short as human lives are, you know, what do you think the average life is throughout history? don't count infant deaths, because that'll, like, if you survive past infancy, what are you probably going to live to like 60, 50 to 60 over time? That's a really short time. And I feel like it's tempting or easy to see your life as more significant to the lifetime of someone in the past, when people in the past thought themselves as the present, just as we do, and we will be seen as the past to people in the future. As obvious as that might sound to some of you, I think it's important for other people to kind of think about that and realize that you are a generation of people among many generations. You are a small time period in history among many time periods. And I think that is important to recognize, you know? Like, we aren't some... And I the reason I'm saying this is because when someone brings up some apocalyptic thing, it kind of sounds like you're saying the end of the world, and that you're the generation where the world is going to end. That's easy to think when you're the generation that's alive. And it's not so easy to think that you are simply just one other generation among thousands that will just be one section of history, okay? To people in 2800 AD, you're going to be like what we saw of, 1200 AD. Does that make sense?
All this literature suggests that different creeds had different reactions to the coming of Islam. These range from shock to anger to pragmatism, three rational reactions to the system shock that the Islamic conquests would have been to those living in the Byzantine Empire at the time of their occurrence. It should be mentioned, however, that thus far, we have only talked about how various Christian sects reacted to the Islamic conquests. For other religious communities, like the Jews, the coming of Islam meant a coming of more freedom, as caliphs like Umar allowed them to settle in Jerusalem, something they had not been allowed to do under Byzantine emperors like Heraclius.
I'm sure that Christians saw Muslims when they were a new thing, a lot like Jews must have seen Christians, right? As just this other Abrahamic religion that is claiming something that they don't claim. And so Jewish people seeing them as a possible better scenario doesn't surprise me.
This
I feel like I'm pausing too much.
Is indicative of the complexity of reactions in the former Byzantine territories to the Islamic conquests. Both inside and outside the new Byzantine borders, former and current Byzantine subjects had to cope with these seismic shifts, and did so in very different ways based on location, belief, and social status. The Byzantine reaction to the Islamic conquests also involved changing the economic structure of their now shrunken empire. The lost provinces in Syria, Egypt, and North Africa were important economic and cultural hubs, containing large and supremely important cities like Alexandria and Antioch,
A lot of grain
both of which were now
up here,
taken
right,
over
too?
by the Rashidun Caliphate. Moreover, other economically important parts of the Byzantine Empire, such as Eastern Anatolia, were not fully conquered, but were nonetheless devastated by raids or wars during the 7th and 8th centuries. Other regions, like the islands of Cyprus and Armenia, became condominiums of both the Arabs and the Byzantines, subject to joint taxation by both powers. As was to be
Cyprus
expected,
can't
the
catch a break.
Byzantines had to adapt to this new economic reality. Some cities in the newly Arab-conquered
camels.
Near East changed due to the reorientation of their economies to new trade routes, with some towns declining and others rising. This was a slow process that occurred throughout the 7th century CE, as Christian, Jewish, and now new Islamic settlements were formed throughout regions like Palestine. Social and
The thing about Islam that is a lot different from Christianity to me, and maybe that's because Christianity has its origins within the Roman Empire, which was very opposed to Christianity at the beginning. But the big difference I see is that Islam seemed to have picked up very... So I guess kind of Islam, Muhammad to Islam is kind of Jesus to us. I don't know enough about Islam and Christianity and Judaism or religion at all to be confident completely in this. But for Christianity, it took a few centuries of stuff, but to be accepted, eventually Constantine, Eastern Romans, making it the state religion of the Eastern Romans. But Islam just seemed to just, from the get-go, just spread like crazy.
Economic elites in the regions, now under the control of the Islamic Caliphate, were thus subject to new social hierarchies, with Muslim officials at the top and with taxes going to new capitals like Baghdad. The militarization of the frontier regions, a factor we'll look at later, necessitated a shift in economic production. In many border regions between the Byzantines and the Caliphate, such as Anatolia, new military settlements were created, expanding their landholdings and increasing their economic power. Thus, a new landowning elite, comprised predominantly of military men of soldierly origins, was created during the 7th and 8th centuries CE, replacing the old senatorial elites who ruled over these lands before. Urban bishops also managed to gain some economic power.
At the time, Christian archbishops and patriarchs were allowed to be married. This is now not the case in the Eastern churches, as marriage
As previously secondary. Urban bishops also managed to gain some economic power, as previously secondary cities left within Byzantium became more prominent economically. Some bishops even managed to create family dynasties. The patronage of churches also shifted, as offerings in the Church of St. Demetrios in Thessaloniki from the period show a focus on families. This shows a shift in religious traditions, possibly due to the chaos and social transformation brought by the Islamic conquests, even in places far away from the wars.
One sec, I'll be right back, guys. Okay, back.
Places like Anatolia, where the invasions had an impact due to the chaos and social transformation brought by the Islamic conquests, even in places far away from the wars. In places like Anatolia, where the invasions had an impact on population size and settlements, the economy shifted. This led to a more rural economy, based on fortresses and larger plots of land worked by local peasants. Thus, Byzantium had a more feudal society, whose inequalities would accumulate over the next 3 centuries. This was a vastly different system from the one that had existed before the Islamic conquests, where the Byzantine...
Is he suggesting there that the rise of European feudalism, or at least Eastern European feudalism, was a direct result of Muslim conquests in Byzantine territory?
Economy was
or am I reading too much into that?
Integrating rural areas with large urban centers. This system eroded away after the Islamic conquest, as during the wars with the Arabs, many cities declined or were destroyed, making the old economic model less sustainable. Thus, the military elites managed to impose their landlordism on the local population more effectively. With that said, many urban centers in the Byzantine Empire continued to function even after the Arab conquests, although in a more disconnected manner than previously due to the disruptions of trade with the former provinces. Overall, the Byzantine economy that emerged after the 7th century CE was more feudal and military than the one that had existed before the rise of the Islamic Caliphate, and was something that Byzantine elites saw as necessary to respond to the rise of a military force that was powerful enough to best them. This social structure would define Byzantium up until the fall of Constantinople in 1453.
Interesting.
Byzantium's military and administrative system, Byzantine economy, due to the even after.
You go ahead. You can go fast forward if you want, guys. This seems really important.
With that said, many urban centers in the Byzantine Empire continued to function even after the Arab conquests, although in a more disconnected manner than previously due to the disruptions of trade with the former provinces. Overall, the Byzantine economy that emerged after the 7th century CE was more feudal and military than the one that had existed before the rise of the Islamic Caliphate, and was something that Byzantine elites saw as necessary to respond to the rise of a military force that was powerful enough to best them. This social structure would define Byzantium up until the fall of Constantinople in 1453.
Wow.
Byzantium's military and administrative systems were also subject to major changes as a response to the Islamic conquests, partially due to the evident weaknesses the Byzantine army faced in the early invasions, during which time the Romans suffered many military defeats to Arab forces, leading to the loss of Egypt and Syria. Because of this, it was evident that military reforms had to be conducted. After the Islamic invasions, the Eastern Roman Empire was now shrunk and required strong internal cohesion. Thus, new taxation structures...
This makes me think of something I said a while back, but I think is true, is that religion is a powerful motivator. And I just like survival of the fittest and like evolution, like stuff. I feel like if you're facing a country without a religion, or if one nation is battling another nation, and one has a religion, and the other one doesn't have one, or at least religion isn't just religion. It's a more captivating religious sense against one that has less a captivating one, then the country, I feel like religion provides a sort of fighting factor and unity factor that non-religious societies can't match when it comes to stuff like warfare, because it's an underlying thing that if everyone believes in it and wants it, that it's going to be able to go through a lot of struggles that other entities might have their populations give up or fracture. It provides a glue that you're all kind of tied to the same thing. And I think that's interesting and something I've been thinking about more and more. One of the benefits of religion in conquering armies.
Construct and required strong internal cohesion.
That makes sense.
Thus, new taxation structures were constructed to curtail the power of regional officials and likely the new classes of landowners, eventually leading to the re-establishment of some imperial authority in the provinces. The thematic system of military provinces, which was in its larval stage during the 6th century, began to fully solidify in the 7th century CE. These themata had appointed regional officials called the Diuikitai, who were responsible for fiscal and tax administration. The central banking of the empire was already undergoing some reforms during the early reign of Heraclius, particularly in the minting of coinage and its own administrative independence. These processes continued throughout the 7th and 8th centuries CE, as the coffers of the state had to cope with the pressure of Rashidun and Umayyad raids. The 5th to 7th centuries were volatile for Eastern Rome even before the Islamic conquests, as wars with Persia and frontier states like Armenia led to increasing border militarization. However, the various military structures that emerged in these frontier regions continued to increase in number and financial investment in the 7th century. These frontier guards began to include local militias as well, and professional soldiers of various ethnicities. Eventually, this led to the formation of the Akratai border troops in the 9th century CE, who became famous in Byzantine folklore. Of these Akratai, the most famous is Digenis Akrates, a half-Saracen, half-Greek soldier who achieved many victories on the Byzantine border and bested even death in some folk songs. This folk tradition indicates how these military changes culminated in the 9th century CE.
Let's just read this. Many landmarks in Cyprus have folk legends connected to this guy, Digenis Akratas. The Pentadactylos, or Five Fingers mountain range in the north near Kyrenia/Gyrne, is said to have emerged when Digenis tripped and crashed his hand on the mountain. Between his five fingers, the rock of the Greek in the southwest near Paphos/Boph is said to have appeared when Akratas threw it to crush a Saracen raid ship. So the mountains were formed like in between his fingers. Am I getting that?
And were then received by parts of the local Christian population. These new administrative structures were paid in cash and thus embedded themselves in the local economy. This new status quo had impacts on the legal system, namely in its decline. Byzantium was known for its legal tradition, particularly in the aftermath of the creation of the Codex Justinianus by Emperor Justinian. The 7th and 8th centuries CE saw a decline in both legal structures and personnel. Far fewer legal notables and courts existed.
Again, guys, look how the Byzantine Eastern Roman holdings on the Italian peninsula look like the Papal States. It's awesome.
Both legal structures and personnel. Far fewer legal notables and courts existed due to the loss of legal schools in the East. The number of legal scholars, a respected position during the late antique period, dwindled after the early Islamic conquests, impacting the quality of judicial dispensation throughout the empire.
Judicial system is one of the most I think taken for granted things ever. There are a lot of things in judicial systems around the world that annoy people, and I get it. But the fact that they're like a judicial system, a working judicial system is so crazy when you think about it. It really is, okay? Anyone who takes a judicial system for granted, I don't get you. I was about to say I don't like you, but I don't understand you. Okay, that is an incredibly difficult thing to create. I would imagine in any human society is a semi-just. I don't think any legal system can be completely fair or just. Legal system. I think that is the sign of a very developed society, and trying to get as close to a judicial system that doesn't discriminate as much as possible is pretty crazy, I think.
Adjacent positions, like the notaries and barristers formerly famous in Eastern Rome, also became rarer. Many of these learned lawyers had been based in the eastern provinces, and their skills were now deprived to the Byzantines, as they were instead forced to deal with new taxation and administrative regimes under Islamic rule. Thus, we can see that Byzantine administration contracted in terms of legal officials, but also increased in terms of military ones. In some respects, Byzantium lost many of its resources and significantly declined in administrative control. Thus, new structures, both military and administrative, were needed to fill the gap left by the decline of the previous administrations. In the 8th to 9th centuries CE, the Byzantine realm was more cohesive and militarized, particularly in the east. This was a feedback loop which synergized with the ascending military and landowning aristocracies and likely solidified the military-industrial complex and the feudal nature of the medieval Byzantine state. From the Byzantine elite's point of view, these changes were necessary to ensure the state was strong.
What is the point of the... I've seen videos on the design of shields, I think, whether I reacted to them or not. But what exactly is the point of the you know, triangulated downward side? Is it just it's easier to maneuver? Do you get like the best of both worlds? And like imagine a shield that you can see my pointer right here, that like was just an oval and went down here and up here, right? And then imagine a shield that is just circular and just stopped right here, and then you don't have this. And maybe this just kind of gives the best of both worlds of protection of the oval, but ease of mobility of the circle. And I'd imagine maybe that's the reason why this is nice, is you get a bit of protection that an oval big shield would provide while not getting the entire weight and bulk of a oval shield.
Another aspect of the Byzantine Empire that underwent significant change after the Islamic conquests was its political and cultural institutions. Byzantium faced much displacement due to the Islamic conquests, with many church leaders from the conquered regions fleeing to Anatolia and Greece. Moreover, the emergence of the Muslim religion on the world stage resulted in some interesting political developments in the Roman Christian Church. Christianity, like Islam, is a religion claiming to have a creed and ethics for all humanity, and was now, for perhaps the first time in its history, facing another faith claiming to be the same. Thus, in an effort to homogenize their religion to present a more unified front against the theological threat posed by Islam, the Byzantine Church began more actively subsuming any lingering local pagan beliefs into Christianity. Moreover, material culture from the period...
I love history so much. I love history because I watch videos on history like I think a lot of people watch TV shows, right? And so I like to learn more, right? But the thing about history is that there are no plot holes. There are 0 plot holes in the story of history. 0. The only plot holes are ones that haven't been discovered or fully realized, or the time period is just there wasn't enough documentation, all right? But everything has a meaning. And I love history, and I love when stuff in videos I learn about connects to something else. I love learning about history, and that is one of the reasons why it is freaking awesome.
The Byzantine Church began more actively subsuming any lingering local pagan beliefs into Christianity. Moreover, material culture from the period continues to show Greek myths, a testament to their impact amongst the Byzantines of all social standings. Non-Chalcedonian Christian denominations also became subject to more strict oversight, as most emperors continued a policy of favoring Chalcedonian Christianity to ensure the empire had a cohesive ideology for all to follow. Thereafter, Christian theology increased its focus on a universal message, with ideas such as the oikoumene, or the whole world as being realms of God with the Byzantine emperor as his chosen representative.
This really shows how religion is a tool, okay? Because why is it changing its religious stance? When it doesn't have an outside threat, then stuff is more, specific. When there is an outside threat, stuff is more general to allow more people in. And again, that just kind of shows me, or maybe I'm not right, it kind of provides more proof to the fact that religion is a very strong tool in society, but it's still, it's a tool. You know what I mean? And the fact that it changes, when certain threats arise, just kind of proves it more to me.
Realms of God with the Byzantine emperor as his chosen representative. This belief made the Byzantine state a more absolutist one, based on Christianity as a unifying ideology. The continuous close relationship between the church and the state in the Byzantine period was established long before the Islamic expansion. However, the existence of an opposing universalist faith meant that Christianity in Byzantium became even more interlinked to the Byzantine state.
And that's exactly what I would do, and that's smart, because as you're facing a much bigger outside threat, getting people under that. Okay, I'm talking too much on this.
Responses to the early Islamic invasions were ones of shock, as the Byzantines saw the Arab forces as little more than tent-dwelling barbarians. However, by the 9th century CE, some Byzantine notables recognized Islam and the so-called Saracens as their cultural equals. This is emphasized in a text written by Patriarch Nicolaus Mystikos and directed towards Caliph al-Muqtadir of Baghdad. Two sovereignties, that of the Arabs and that of the Byzantines, surpass all sovereignty on earth, like the two shining lights in the firmament. For this one reason, if for no other, they ought to be partners and brethren. We ought not, because we are separated in our ways of life, our customs and our worship, to be altogether divided. Nor ought we to deprive ourselves of communication with one another by writing in default of meeting personally. This is the way we ought to think and act, even if no necessity of our affairs compelled us to it.
I think you're a bit optimistic, sir.
These words do not represent the whole of the Christian population of the Byzantine Empire, or even many of the elites. However, it illustrates a major shift in the Byzantine perception of the Muslim other, which occurred in the centuries after the initial Islamic conquests. Politically, the Byzantines had managed to fortify themselves ideologically and politically in response to the rise of the Islamic caliphs. They also had come to realize that this new power, partially inspired by the same Greco-Roman past and entangled by the same trade routes as them, was not going to go anywhere else. Thus, a mutual respect rose among some circles in Byzantium, utilized in diplomacy and correspondence between notables of both great civilizations. The Byzantines saw the lightning bolt rise of the Rashidun and the Umayyad caliphs as a shocking development, unthinkable in their imperial worldview. This led many to the responses we mentioned above, from theological coping mechanisms to political responses to militarization. To Byzantium, the threat seemed existential, and many
theological coping mechanisms. It's just, I think there needs to be more direct a term than that, okay? Seeing a threat, wanting to connect people around you more, make people around you more connected, and therefore be able to build an army and a unified resistance against any power coming to attack, just makes sense, okay? Coping mechanism sounds...
or territories,
I think it's true, but...
important for its economy, were lost forever. Thus, the Byzantines adapted. They became more centralized and militaristic, with many of their civic institutions going into decline. However, their initial shock ended up subsiding as they came to see the permanence of the new status quo. While dreams of a Christian revival continued for centuries, the two great civilizations came to see each other as equals. The Eastern Romans ended up accepting their Muslim neighbors as diplomatic, economic, and sometimes even cultural partners. Much like the border guard to Genus Acritas, the two great civilizations became blended into each other. While the Byzantines continued to fight as Akritae against new Islamic caliphates for centuries onward, they were forever changed and influenced by them. Like their half-Arab folk hero, the Byzantines were forever tied to the East they had lost, and were changed by it. And the ones whom they once saw as barbarians became their equals, whether as rivals or as friends. More videos on the history of the Eastern Roman Empire are on the way.
It's a great video. You got to give credit to early Muslim conquests and just in a way that I'm trying to make different than what was just said. I'm trying to phrase what was just said in a different way to sound smart, I guess. But just you have to respect the immediate and prolonged success of Arab Muslim armies during and after the death of Muhammad. It's just insane. Okay, respect or not, or no, not respect or not. You have to respect. Glee or not, happiness or not, you have to respect the power that came from early Muslim conquests, something that the Byzantines eventually figured out. A lot of it, I wonder if the early Muslim conquests came in a time where the Sassanids and Byzantines were at an especially vulnerable position or time. Nonetheless, it's freaking impressive. It's a great video from Kings and Generals. I love y'all. Please, if I said anything stupid or just wrong, or if you agree with it, whatever, I would love to see your comments down below. Please let me know. I am very okay with people calling me out, okay? I would be upset if you didn't call me out of something that you just blatantly disagree with or something I said was wrong. Love to see any comments. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'd love for you to subscribe completely free, and we'll keep on learning. All right? Bye, guys.